Hey everyone, I chose to do my video lecture on a peer-reviewed article entitled The Original Supply-Siders, Warren Harding and Calvin Coolidge. This article was written by John Moore and it was published by the Independent Institute in the spring of 2014. The article title references supply-siders. Now, this is a reference to supply-side economics, which is an economic theory that suggests that economic growth can be best achieved by lower taxes, decreased regulation, and allowing and encouraging free trade. A little bit more about the author. John A. Moore is professor of finance at Walsh College. He is also a CPA, and he has received a few awards, including the Colonial Dames Award and the James Salto Award. In addition, Dr. Moore has served as CFO for a few different commercial real estate firms, and he has received his PhD in economics from Wayne State University. The publisher of this article was the Independent Institute. Now, just reading off their bio here on their website, I don't know a whole lot about them, but their bio says that they are a nonprofit, nonpartisan public policy research organization, and their aim is to promote a peaceful, prosperous, and free society which is grounded in a commitment to human worth and dignity. I chose to review this particular article for a couple different reasons. One of the main reasons was I thought that it fit very nicely into the context of the economic expansion of the U.S. in the 1920s that we learned about in our text. In addition, President Harding and President Coolidge are two administrations that I have not learned too much about. And also, on a personal note, they were both Republican presidents, and I am myself a dedicated member of the Republican Party, so I thought it'd be really neat to learn about some of my party's previous presidents and their failures and successes. In regards to the context that we learned about in the text, we learned that the U.S. economy really boomed in the 1920s. If we look back to our text, we saw that the U.S. was launched into the number one position globally as far as economy is concerned. In 1922, we also learned that the U.S. raised import taxes to the highest levels ever with the passage of the Fordney-Macomber tariff, which did protect American industry, but it also had some negative repercussions on European development and global growth overall. Capital reserves in the U.S. by private banks and individuals greatly rose in the 1920s, and this led to record stock prices and record growth in wealth for the average American. We learned that this growth was not without its negative aspects, however, and in our text we learned that a lot of the growth in American consumption was done on the ground of debt, and also while this growth did benefit the U.S. in the short run, it didn't really help the global economy on a large scale. Diving back into the article here, I'm going to highlight some of the main arguments from Dr. Moore and kind of go over the overview of the article. President Harding served from 1921 to 1923. That year he actually passed away from some health reasons, and the Vice President Calvin Coolidge assumed the presidency from 1923 to 1929. Both of these presidents oversaw some of the most successful and productive economic periods in American history in the 1920s. The author, Dr. Moore, suggests that they attempted to reverse key elements of the statism, which was introduced into the American economy between 1900 and 1920. He argues that their policies incentivized private sector growth and improved the circumstances of the large majority of Americans. He shows this by showing the measures by which these presidents improved the economy. Production, which was measured by GDP, rapidly increased. Real wages rose. The unemployment rate fell and remained below 5% after 1924. In addition, the income tax rates were lowered, the federal government costs were also reduced, and the national debt actually shrank. Dr. Moore notes here that while he does give credit to these presidents for their incredible... The article does note that despite these economic successes, both Presidents Harding and Coolidge are not without criticism, and it notes that three rankings of American presidents by historians over the past half-century actually ranked Harding dead last, and President Coolidge did only a little bit better, actually making it to the bottom quarter in the same surveys. However, Dr. Moore suggests that Harding's policies deserve to be looked at again because they guided the country out of recession and into prosperity in a very short period. It's interesting to note that modern advocates for a smaller government and lower taxes use the Reagan administration as a prime example. However, Harding's administration was actually the first to successfully apply these principles. Now, President Coolidge's reputation has been partially repaired in recent years because of some favorable biographies, but President Harding, his reputation actually still remains very badly tarnished. His administration was scandalized by the Teapot Dome debacle and the dishonest dealings of some cabinet officials. Now, President Harding had some serious personal faults, and scandals tore apart his presidency and affected his ability to lead. For example, he did select his friends for Interior Secretary and Attorney General. In addition, he had multiple extramarital affairs, and he was regularly serving alcohol in the White House during Prohibition when alcohol was not legal. So definitely some major criticisms here, but the article is quick to note that Harding did start a revolution in economic policy beginning in 1921. His policy initiatives were focused on a belief that the private sector was the most important component of American prosperity, and that the government should take as little a role as possible in managing the economy, kind of what would be a modern-day libertarian approach. To achieve these results, the federal government should do its best to lower tax rates, cut expenditures by eliminating costs, and reducing the national debt. Although President Harding did make some serious errors with his cabinet, he is credited with some great posts, including Andrew Mellon as Treasury Secretary and Charles Dawes as the first director of the Bureau of the Budget. Both of these positions helped to run the administration's economic and financial affairs for the majority of the 1920s. And it's interesting to note here that Vice President Coolidge actually joined in those cabinet meetings and is credited as the first vice president to regularly participate in cabinet meetings. Both Harding and Coolidge aimed to reduce the role of the government in the economy, and the results they showed from 1921 to 1928 demonstrate that success. Now, the U.S. overall in the 1920s was in the midst of some major changes. The U.S. had been catapulted into the top of the world powers, arguably becoming the number one world power, and also some changes in the way Americans lived occurred. So Americans were more moving to urban cities than rural communities. The auto industry was booming. Radio, movies, and air travel were beginning to become mainstream. And in 1913, two major pieces of legislation greatly affected the government's ability to influence the economy. So the 16th Amendment established a national income tax, and also in the same year, Congress ratified the Federal Reserve Act, which created a central bank and a conduit for the government to impact the economy and control the monetary policy. Due to World War I, the U.S. government had to massively increase spending to fund the American military. Now, the costs of World War I required ways to fund them. So in 1918, the top income tax rate was increased to 70.3%, which seems very high by today's standards. And in addition, the national debt, which was only $1.2 billion in 1916, increased to a record $25.5 billion by 1919. All things considered, the nation was clearly in a huge economic recession. Now, during the Harding presidency, this represents the only time in the 20th century when the federal government actually reduced its non-military expenses in absolute terms. Some of the major events that guided this process included tax reform and reduced rates of federal government spending. Now, the administration's economic plan had three main points. The first was to reduce tax burdens on Americans. The second was to instill a new culture of frugality in the government. And lastly, the government would not be engineering or planning prosperity. Instead, it needed to kind of stand aside and allow the private sector to lead the recovery process. Now, the Harding administration's economic successes were absolutely remarkable over the next 4 years. We see evidence here that the GDP per capita had been about $5,400 in 1920, but rebounded to $6,000 in 1923, a massive increase of 11.4% in only 3 years. At the same time, the national debt shrank from $24.3 billion to $22.3 billion. And if we can put it in today's terms, when the debt actually never shrinks, it's actually quite remarkable. In fall of 1921, President Harding was willing to say that we are working our way out of a welter of waste and prodigal spending at a most impressive rate. And by 1923, the nation was enjoying real economic prosperity like never before. As the national economy rebounded, President Harding was impressively able to really scale back the size of the federal government. Now, in August of 1923, President Harding died of natural causes. President Coolidge was sworn in and immediately intended to retain the policies that Harding had set forward. We also see here that President Coolidge continued the agenda of lowering the national debt. Now, the federal debt had fallen $3 billion between 1920 and 1924, but President Coolidge managed to do even better, lowering it another $3.5 billion over the following 4 years. A really in-depth review of the expenditures between 1921 and 1928 show that both President Harding and Coolidge were really just about equally successful in controlling expenditures. In his 1925 inauguration address, Coolidge says that, I favor the policy of economy, not because I wish to save money, but because I wish to save people. Every dollar that we carelessly waste means that their life will be so much more the meager. Every dollar that we prudently save means that their life will be so much more abundant. Economy is idealism in its most practical form. The author concludes the article by just going over some of the main points here, but overall we can see that both President Harding and President Coolidge managed to enable a true economic boom in the 1920s, lower the tax rates of American citizens, and also cut back on federal expenditures, which, if you put it in the context of the modern day, is really remarkable because, as we all know, that really doesn't happen these days. So thank you so much for watching, everyone, and have a great day.